Welcome to this distinguished speaker event. Our speaker for the evening is Dr. Srinivas Yanamandra. Dr. Srinivas is currently Chief Compliance Officer at the BRICS New Development Bank, and I hope Srinivas will talk a little bit about the bank to apprise you all of this exciting development in the financial arena and the global financial arena involving emerging markets. So he is heading this new bank, which is not just the New Development Bank, but it is really a new development bank. So in his current role, he is responsible for setting up the compliance function and managing the aspects relating to anti-money laundering, an increasingly important function all over the world, anti-fraud and anti-corruption, as well as institutionalizing the compliance culture within the newly set up institution. Before joining the NDB, Srinivas worked at the IDFC Bank, where he was heading the personal banking compliance and served as its AML principal officer and fraud reporting nodal officer of the bank. Prior to that, for about a decade, Srinivas was with the ICICI Bank, and he was actively involved in setting up various regulatory compliance initiatives, including the group compliance and anti-money laundering framework at ICICI Bank. So Srinivas is a Srinivas is a fellow of International Compliance Association UK and a certified anti-money laundering specialist from the USA. So he is a PhD from the DBA program, the DBA Doctor of Business Administration from the University of Manchester, and he is a chartered accountant and cost accountant, and was a national rank holder in both the CA final and the CWA final exam and the CA international exam at the third level. Apart from his professional interests, he loves writing and writes regularly to professional magazines as well as on the literary side. So he has two fiction titles, Hakuna Matata, Life is Calling, and I Love You Vishwamitra, that are available on Amazon. Welcome, Srinivas.
Making this event happen at a very short notice. In fact, we conceptualized this entire lecture in the last 2 days. I just happened to send him a message on Sunday, and everything has fallen in place thanks to his support. So for my personal thanks to Dr. Chakravarti, because I met him almost a decade back and continuously keep on barging into his place and say that kuch to karenge in terms of these kind of activities actually. But finally I'm glad that one day we could really do something to start with much more greater things in future. Trying to understand what this new concept is all about. Personally, let me just give a kind of 2-3 disclaimers in terms of as my role of compliance. One is none of this is in the official view or anything of the NDB per se, but this is all my personal reading that I have gathered over a period of time in my role as the new person who is going to do some of these regulatory compliances for the bank. So we are in the phase of learning as well. So this material is basically for a personal consumption in terms of a non-media element and in terms of academic understanding. So I will share some of those papers based on which this entire thing has been put up. And most of this stuff you will find on NDB's website in terms of the projects that I am going to talk on the events of NDB that are going to get covered during the lecture. You will find most of this stuff in public domain, so nothing is inside kind of an information or anything. But the idea is to present some new learning as to how, once again, if you try to see the overall history of the finance, maybe in the late or early 19th after the 19th century has begun, how finance as a function started contributing to the development of the society. So we have seen it in the area of infrastructure finance, we have seen it in the area of countering the terrorism, we have seen it in the area of recent demonetization exercise where banks have been used for the purpose of countering the corruption menace. So any of the public policy goals, if governments are supposed to lead through to success, there is a lot of impetus that is coming from the financial system. Now this greening of the financial system is going to be one important aspect of this entire contribution to the finance is going to do the real society. I think that is one of the important activities or the aspects that we need to register after this lecture, maybe personally, that to whosoever can claim that academics is a dismal science, I think this is an answer. It is not going to be dismal science. But if the public policy can be shaped up in the right spirit, you will definitely find some kind of a solutions coming out from the economists and the public policy champions that will make a real world or the real lives of the people better. So without much about the introduction or anything, let me just tell you. Green bonds, what have you thought about green bonds?
Projection is green infrastructure, like it has been made mandatory for the Paris climate change. Okay. The Paris climate deals.
Okay. And anybody, any other thoughts about green?
So the carbon credits that the countries are giving, and countries and the industries are giving. So it might be having some relation with the financial terms.
Okay, the green carbon credits, that is one topic that we have heard. So I think your understanding is as good as my understanding about a couple of months back, I can say a couple of weeks back, until I started getting into this topic myself. These are all some of these disjoint essays, like green bonds that you said, and the carbon trading that you have said, and the Paris Agreement that we have said. But let me take you through some of these theoretical aspects as to where these all things have structurally flown together. So I will start with a bit of introduction of some of these taxonomy and certain terms, and then get into how financial system is going to play a major role in greening the entire economy. And then we get into two case studies of how China did or is going to do about this entire greening the financial system. And then we cover some things of recent developments in India, what kind of a thought process is going on in India. And then we just summarize what we have discussed in the class. So basically, you heard the terms like climate change, global warming, greenhouse effect. Heard? Or anyone in the class who has not heard? No. Any difference between these three terms? Climate change, global warming, greenhouse effect. Interrelated. What is it? People use it very crazily. You say climate change, yeah, I know global warming. So we keep saying that. But after that, what do you know? So climate change, like this is a very subtle difference. Now the entire beauty of me getting into this topic is when I started reading about this. Climate change, if you use the term, what we are meaning is basically the statistical averages of the climate over a period of decades or millions of years or centuries of years. How weather or climatic conditions got changed. In fact, even a step back, what is the difference between climate and weather?
Weather is temporary, climate is calculated over a period of time.
Yeah. So climate is what you get and weather is what you deserve basically. So climate is what is natural phenomenon, weather is what we do to climate and then ultimately get impacted by it. So a climate change is basically a natural phenomena over a period of time, and it is calculated on the statistical averages. So a lot of research, especially this entire technical stuff, if people are from engineering or science background, they help me understand better than what I could learn in the last few days. But what I got to know is basically from the carbon dating and even from the ice particle analysis in the poles. You typically get to know about how weather conditions have really undergone changes centuries over and the millions of years over. Now those changes could be both positive as well as negative. So when we talk about climate change, we are not necessarily talking about warming. It could be a situation like which has happened sometime in the 14th century or 15th century when we have got into a little ice age period. So there is a too much of ice aging also that can happen. That is also a climate change. So when we talk about climate change, it is a change, which is basically a kind of a modulus, which is basically either positive or negative. Now within that climate change, if you are talking about a phenomena which is a positive, which is basically in terms of the increased heat or the radiation over a period of time, then that gets into something called as global warming. So within climate change, leave out the negative side of it, or the cold side of it, or the cooling part of it, because any change is basically either warming up or cooling up the atmosphere. So if you get into the warming up of the aspect, then it is called as the global warming. Now why does the warming effect happen? So anyway, a lot of people are aware of these kind of discussions, but basically to just give an understanding, if say for example Earth is considered as a kind of a greenhouse. So a greenhouse, you know, right? Any idea about what is a greenhouse?
Gases which store some light, heat in the form of light, and they don't let it pass through the body.
Correct. So typically the picture that I have put in there is a greenhouse. A greenhouse is a temporary creation, man-made, in a glass kind of a construction where there are plants inside, and the sunlight passes through and allows the plants to exhale kind of a carbon dioxide. But because of the same transparency of the glass which the sunlight passes through, but the temperature can't go up, so that the place gets naturally maintained at a particular temperature. The same thing, which is a greenhouse, happens on the Earth itself. So the layer of the atmosphere, which is supposed to be contained with some of these things, chemical gases like your oxygen, which is going to cover your top layer like a kind of a layer through which the sun's ray can pass and then hit the Earth, and some portion is retained by the Earth and some portion is emitted back. When it is getting emitted back, the medium, if it is as transparent as original, then the ray would have gone back and the Earth's temperature would typically get maintained at 15 degrees centigrade, which is the average. So that's the average people have calculated till the weather records are available. I think so they typically say about 1880. For instance, that time I think the weather calculations are more accurate and scientifically available, because from that day onwards I think the consistency in terms of what constitutes weather and which parts of the world the data is available. So that time onwards, it is called as the pre-industrial area and the post-industrial area, the temperatures are like 50 degrees centigrade. That is considered as a kind of a world average. Now that average atmosphere or whatever is the temperature, now if the medium is not as transparent, it will not go above the atmosphere. So some of these gases, like oxygen for example, which is allowing the sunlight to pass into the Earth and then remitting it back, say for example, once it gets either heated on the Earth, and then because of the chemical reaction, the carbon dioxide that is getting produced by the plants, or the exhaling that we do is coming out of the carbon dioxide, or the fossil fuel burning, all these things are going to emit the entire carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That is going to create a kind of a gas shield, and of all the things that are there going to create a kind of a gas shield on the top of the atmosphere, like one is carbon dioxide, which is the mostly accounted for chemical, which is causing this kind of an effect. Along with that, there is methane, there is water vapor, for instance. H2O is also one of the, that's the reason why people talk about using of the heated geysers. And instead of using heated geysers for the purpose of bathing, that is also one of the carbon footprint that we are leaving onto the Earth's, whatever is the future kind of a climate actually. So the point is, just like a greenhouse is having a natural ecosystem within itself, whereby the radiation enters, but the effect of the radiation retains because of a kind of a natural barrier, so that the room temperature is maintained. Earth is also designed in such a way. Absence of this is example of Venus planet. Venus doesn't have a such kind of a system, therefore there is no heating mechanism that happens, and the temperature there is typically falls into negative century. And that's the reason it's the coldest planet. But for us, why 50 degrees maintained is because the Earth is getting surrounded with this natural cover. Now this natural ecosystem is getting disturbed by higher than naturally required carbon emissions. And that higher than the required natural carbon emissions takes years together to get cleared from the Earth's surface or the atmospheric surface. Like for example, carbon dioxide. Any typical carbon dioxide that gets emitted into the sky typically stays about 100 years. So it cannot be easily removed from the Earth's surface. That means it blocks the radiation that is supposed to go out in a natural way, and it is going to emit it backwards in terms of the heat more than what is required under the room temperature. So that effect
is what is called as a greenhouse effect. A greenhouse effect is a very naturalistic phenomena by which the Earth's temperature is maintained at a particular degree centigrade in such a way that the temperature is sustainable for the human life, or the temperature is conducive for the human life to be sustainable over a long period of time. Now, because of some of these greenhouse gas emissions, typically talking about carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, chlorofluorocarbons, or the water vapor, these are the greenhouse gases. Because of these greenhouse gases getting emitted more than in the required quantum, or because of the factors that are leading to the deforestation, or because of the factors that are like fossil fuel burning, or because of the highly increased usage of fertilizers, manure management, all these things are leading to a kind of a carbon footprint which is more than the greenhouse gas effect naturally would have required us to get at the atmospheric level. So the over-condensation that is happening in the atmosphere is leading to the phenomena called as the global warming. Now the difference between the global warming and greenhouse effect is that greenhouse effect is one of the factors of global warming. Everybody understand? It is one of the effects. How Earth can be kept warm is, there is alternative theory, because which is going to, if you see the alternative is typically come, because people keep criticizing saying that climate change is a kind of a fad and it is not a realistic thing, and some people claim that the carbon footprint is not a realistic reason because of the sun's radiation getting increased over a period of time. It is not necessary that because of the carbon this kind of a phenomenon has happened. The sun's radiation, if it has increased, naturally when it is going back also you will feel the heat. But somehow the available literature or the available research to date across different countries has mentioned that 90% of the changes that have happened in the last century are only human made. Now only question is that if somebody has to really question in terms of the climate change research and the entire mechanism and the whole edifice that is getting built, because we are going to use our entire lecture on the basis of this. If somebody has to question this basis, then the theory is somewhere else. We need to go and understand how that research has been done, whether it is correct, what kind of an isotopic analysis they have done, what averages they have done, who funded the research, why that research has given that kind of a result, lot of things that can come up. But assume that the research that is conducted by these many international organizations is holding to be true. What we were given to understand is that 90% of these emissions are today are as a result of human-made contribution rather than sun's own natural heightened radiation impact. It has happened in 1450 to I think 1520. There are some days I can share it across with you. In those couple of centuries, that's when I was given to understand that the Greenland got cut off from Finland actually because of the heightened amount of solar radiation and the ice got cut. And that has become a kind of a separate land. So that kind of a phenomena exists. So global warming can exist not necessarily because of greenhouse effect, or it could be because of sun's natural radiation getting increased, which is a kind of, if you have to see it in the history of a mankind or history of the time, that is also a possible factor. But if you have to see it in the context of what research we have been seeing it for the 100 or 200 years, then what we are given to understand at this point in time by the academic research is that it is human contribution. We are clear on these terms? Climate change can be positive or negative. Positive if we say in terms of the increased heat and the warming or cooling. If the warming effect is considered, it is called as global warming. Global warming can be of again two types. Something can be man-made, something can be solar radiance, which is increased solar incidence or increased incidence of solar radiance. If you leave out the increased incidence of solar radiance on the naturalistic front, the human-made factor that is contributing is called as the greenhouse effect. And that greenhouse effect are the greenhouse gas emissions being a contributory factor to the greenhouse effect, being a contributory factor to global warming, being a contributory factor to climate change is the problem we are trying to address. Understood? And what did we do to do these kind of things? 1992, this has been recognized as the first international risk when the United Nations Framework on Climate Change Convention has been constituted, and this operates through Intergovernmental Panel on the Climate Change IPCC, and they have funded a lot of research in terms of, the initial research has been in terms of how to increase technologies for alternative energy production, like the renewable energies, or in terms of mankind's adaptation to the increased radiance. So some of the research has been focused more in terms of how we can be adapted to the new kind of an environment. But that research was not very effective or successful because the kind of problem that people have identified as growing is not very much in terms of adaptable strategies could not be really worked out. So Kyoto Protocol is basically the first framework under the United Nations Convention. Basically, the United Nations Convention typically says that how to go about, but it doesn't tell you about exactly the target-based kind of an approach. So Kyoto Protocol, which is called as the Conference of Parties and the Conference of the Countries basically, have gathered for the first time, and this Conference of Parties since I think 1997, they are organizing a lot of COPs. That is how you see Paris Agreement is called as the COP21, and the next one is going to happen next year in Netherlands, maybe the COP 23 this year. So basically, the COP1 has identified that we need to not only fund the research in terms of adaptation, but we also need to fund some amount of research and the commitments in terms of stopping the menace to occur in the first place. Adaptation comes after the menace occur, but we have a chance to control this adaptation itself by not allowing this event to happen at all. And that resolution initially started in two different phases. The initial commitments are from 2008 to 2012, and the current commitments are between 2013 till about 2015. The Paris Agreement is a kind of a milestone event in that entire journey of the climate change commitments of the nations. Why? Because there is a visible target that is now laid down. Any idea about the target? So the Paris Agreement is typically saying that by 2050, pre-industrial level, whatever is the climate average, which is typically around 15, we should not increase the Earth's temperature by more than 2 degrees centigrade. That's the target which is set by all countries and the other signatories to the Paris Agreement. And in the best case scenario, we should never let it to go beyond 1.5 degrees centigrade. 2 is basically the sustenance level, that is what we can be comfortable. It is basically the pre-diabetes and diabetic kind of a thing. So what they are saying is that beyond 2, you are not supposed to happen, that is a kind of danger zone. 1.5 is basically what we should aim to ensure that we should not increase the temperature. I think we are at around 1.3 right now. From the pre-industrial, whatever is the climatic average temperature, we reached up to 1.3. Best effort basis, each country has been asked to put out their nationally determined contributions, NDCs as they call it. The nationally determined contributions, they are signatories to this convention where they have to lay down their NDCs or nationally determined commitments, saying that in my country I will not allow beyond this amount of GHG emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, in such a way that the commitments of all the countries put together should not lead the world's temperature beyond 1.3 idealistic target. 2 is the worst and the danger zone. That is what is Paris Agreement, which is very important, significant milestone because of this NDC, nationally determined commitments. To achieve that nationally determined commitments, the first step that has been taken in the Paris Convention and the Paris Agreement is that while you can focus in terms of adaptability, climate resilience, and ensuring that low greenhouse gas emissions, they wanted to use finance as a tool to achieve this objective. So one of the newest entrant into this field is financial sector. So they said that in any country's NDC, nationally determined commitments, you need to also include what is the commitment that they will use finance as a tool to achieve this climate change objective. Which is similarly to people who have been familiar with Indian banking, you know what is the priority sector lending? So 40% of Indian banks lending is supposed to be to priority sectors, which is like agriculture, indirect agriculture, direct agriculture, and after Raghuram Rajan has changed some of the policy measures. So priority sector, the contribution to renewable energy has been included as one of the priority sector lending. The sector has been added as in 2014 and 15. He added renewable energy as also one of the components considered as a priority sector. So in India, we used to do this kind of directed lending measures, what we used to call as policy lending. So policy lending is basically where instead of banks deciding that this is the kind of lending they want to pursue, governments try to influence the strategy of the banks and the lending strategies of the banks and say that you have to lend to this mechanism. So we know a crude version of this already in our system, but what is more expected is not the crude version, but a more refined version. How finance can contribute to this climate change initiative? So there are three roles as I can distinctly identify here. One is financing, like banks or markets can contribute to the financing itself. So you can ask a bank to say that you have to lend this much percentage to any kind of a project that has got any kind of a saving in terms of the energy, or any kind of a project which has got focus in terms of renewable energy, lend more. So that is a kind of policy directed lending, that is positive side. On the negative side, you start pricing the lending rates in such a way that the environmental risk, if you ascertain, you increase the risk of the other risk pricing of the borrower. So that you are making the borrower to get finance from banks a little costlier if his environmental constraints is not up to the mark and it is not leading us to reach our indices. So either by ensuring that the covenants are included in the pricing, or by ensuring that the financing is conducive to the climate change environment, the greenhouse gas emissions reduction, you allow financing to channel towards this kind of a objective. Or you also can fund research, you also can fund innovation, you also can facilitate a lot of activities that would require this amount of money. That is a direct financing. Either the institutions like financial institutions or banks can do this kind of a thing, or you can allow these large corporates to raise bonds instead of doing the financing. Now once you know financing, then everything is the innovation out of financing. So either you get the money from the banks, or you go into the capital market and raise the money for yourself to do the similar kind of a objectives. So just like either a person can go and take a bank loan, or you can raise a bond into the market and get the money from the market, which is called as a green bond, and then start using it for the specified purpose, and then start disclosing to the market as to why he has borrowed that money from the market and how he has used this money. So typically this is what we generally do in the kind of our infrastructure bonds and the gold monetization bonds. And typically the bonds will have certain specific objectives laid down. Investors who are interested in such kind of an objectives will start investing into this. So that is basically the fundraising kind of a thing. Our last one is another important event that is occurring using fintech. So fintech, financial innovation technology, that is coming up, using fintech to facilitate this kind of innovation. Like say for example blockchain technology, or the artificial intelligence, or the Internet of Things. So these are the three creative fintech tools. If you go and read under the net, you will find a fintech digital alliance for sustainable development. What it calls for, the United Nations project, what it calls for is basically that you start focusing upon such kind of a research in fintech, which is so far very successful in ensuring that the financial inclusion initiatives are met. Not only on initiatives of financial inclusion, but also make finance affordable to those smallest guys who can focus upon innovations which are conducive to climate change. Like say for example, if somebody can innovate a car which is run by water, for example. In today's environment, you are not able to generate the funding for that guy because banks seek some kind of an innovative models, markets wanted some kind of an insurances, but you don't have people who can fund. But if fintech innovations are there, and if you have crowdsourcing platforms, you know crowdfunding, right? So the peer-to-peer lending basically. So the platforms where you can claim out to the board that I am having this beautiful idea, and if the people are interested in investing in this, and I put it on this, RBI is also coming out with this P2P lending concept. I think that the draft payments are announced. So once you see this kind of a P2P lending happening, then automatically there is a lot of push that can happen to small and medium scale enterprises to get a lot of finance, not only through banks, not only through bonds, but because of this fintech. So there is one more movement, very recent movement in 2016 and 17 that is coming out, and the first report has been released by the One of the United Nations project, which talks about using fintech for the sustainable development. So either the finance can be used directly, either positively or negatively, or it could be used indirectly by fundraising, or it could be used for facilitating through fintech kind of an areas. Is okay? Going okay? Huh? You can just feel free to disturb me anytime. Now, who are the players in getting these kind of initiatives done? So as I said, any kind of a financial system, so you typically have these three players, either the state itself, so which is going to, because ultimately the players are the financial institutions, are the market participants, but these three players can help these financial institutions and the market players to either embrace this model to success, or they may constrain to so much extent that this model will fail. So the important players are basically the financial institutions and the market participants, but the people who can make the playing environment, and the environment is kind of a approachable kind of an environment and is not a constrained environment, is dependent upon these three category of people. One is the state. So the state or the government as a kind of a regulator or supervisor, what kind of policies you have got? So does your bank or does your country encourage any kind of a green bond issuance? Does your country gives any kind of fiscal measures? So the fiscal measures are basically that, if say for example somebody wants to purchase a house or a kind of a, for example, instrument or an appliance, home appliance that is green, are there any kind of a taxation conveyances that are coming out for the green product? So that is a role a state can play. Or if a farmer wants to take some kind of a loan from the bank in terms of a kind of a green enabled kind of a loan, does the state have a kind of concessional credit that is given to them? So these are all the fiscal measures where the state can get into, or even the regulator can give, which is what I told you about the Reserve Bank of India experiment in terms of putting them into the priority sector lending, so that the banks will lend more to the priority sector meeting their commitments. So either the regulator can do something, or the fiscal policy also measures also can start building up some amount of desired effect in terms of the green financing. And I happened to bounce upon a research paper by Bank of England. So the Bank of England also talks about what are the impact of climate change on monetary policy. So because the monetary policy decisions and the interest decisions, because ultimately the monetary policy the central bank is supposed to do about the financial stability also, not only the price stability. So how can climate change influence the monetary policy? That also should be considered as one of the instruments in deciding the monetary policy. That is what the current governor of the Bank of England in recent speeches, if you go through that, he is equivocally mentioning that aspect. So that in monetary policy decisions, they wanted to cover three important risks. One is a physical risk. So the physical risk is basically that if you are going to fund more to, say for example, a fossil burning fuels, for example, or any kind of a industry that has got lot of environmental impact. That is a physical risk. So too much of unchecked credit going into these greenhouse gas emission projects in the long run can lead to a physical risk to the environment. So that is how financing is conducting to a physical risk. And that impact ultimately in the long run, if we have to reverse that trend, is going to have an impact in terms of the country's exchequer. And that is where the monetary policy has to think through how I need to be a step ahead and see what is the kind of the lending that the banks are doing and how much of lending is going to which set of industries and which set of industries are creating more amount of problem to the greenhouse gas emissions and how much of these greenhouse gas emissions are going to influence my NDCs. That thought process, if it has to be factored in monetary policy decisions, then we are calling about the physical risk. And then there is a transition risk which the Bank of England says. The transition risk is, if you don't recognize the problem today, we think that okay, everything is going on good, but at least you sitting in this room definitely know that we are heated up, right? It's not a kind of a normal temperature. Now this risk, we are now slowly getting a sense. 2 years back, 3 years back, 5 years back, we have not got this kind of a inkling that we are having this kind of a problem. But now slowly we all understand that there is going to be some amount of problem. We are bearing this. Now come 2 years, definitely we will not be in this room like this. Now at that point in time, if we go to the public authorities and ask for some changes, Now, say for example, if the building has to be designed again in a way, it should be able to produce some amount of sustainable temperature. The transition risk of sudden policy change in future of the monetary policy also becomes a kind of a risk to the financial stability. So the physical risk that is promoting to direct financing today, or in the absence of any kind of a policy directive today, in future, because of the transition that I need to do by sudden tightening of the credit, suddenly one day RBI can say that no industries will get bank credit. It is not so easy. There are a lot of lending projects that are happening. You can't stop those projects. There is a lot of credit that has gone. And if you suddenly one day put some kind of a spark, then automatically the borrowers will become NPA. Then there is a kind of a financial stability impact. So the transition risk and the legal risk on the banks, because tomorrow the environmental activists can claim that this project has been funded by this bank. So the claiming of the charges, now today you don't know, some of these World Bank projects that are getting funded and the international financial institutions which are funding some of the projects, tomorrow if they land into some kind of an environmental suits, and if the governments or the state orders that this compensation has to be done, then some portion if it has to go to the financial sector also back because they have funded these projects, then that is also going to be a risk. So the point I am trying to make is like, as the state has got a lot of responsibility in making this green finance a kind of a successful venture, either as a regulator by laying down the guidance of it, or as a fiscal authority by providing some amount of the policy purpose to this kind of a green finance, or as a monetary authority by thinking ahead that there could be some amount of physical risk, some amount of transition risk, or some amount of legal risk that the financial sector is going to face in future unless I factor them into my monetary policy decision making today. I am not going to really lead to a kind of a better monetary policy design for tomorrow. So it is not a sustainable monetary policy. So that is how the role of the state will come into picture. Now to do all these things, you need to have standard setting bodies who will lay down guidelines. What is green? Now today I can say anything is green because there is no regulation. SEBI says that you come to me, I will tell you green. That is what SEBI says. Now can they have a kind of a definition where regulator comes and says that I will tell you what is green at the time when you come for a funding? That is not a kind of a workable model which international organizations generally follow. So internationally there are agencies like IFC, Equator Principles, where they have identified some of the sustainable considerations into their regular project financing. Or there is ICMA, which is the International Capital Market Association, and the Climate Bond Initiative. Or there is a G20 task force, which has now recently got set up under the aegis of the G20, where they are focusing much in terms of the climate related disclosures. So how much of the green finance, if it is raised from the market, we need to disclose back to the market. So that disclosure, first of all, we should understand, I talk about greenhouse gas emissions. Now, if somebody were to ask for this university, how much is the greenhouse gas that is getting emitted? We don't have an expert. Not for this university, any kind of an industry, we don't know what is a consistent way to quantify the greenhouse gas emissions in such a way that our definition meets an international standard. Unless we do that as an entity, if we take finance from the market, and I tell them this finance is being used for reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions, how will I do? Unless I today know what is the greenhouse gas emissions as a predefined standard today and say that this is at this X tons. And then in future these X million tons have been reduced to these many X million tons of carbon footprint. So unless I do that kind of an assessment, for which purpose there should be a standard setting body to understand or design the standard first, what sort of disclosures are required. Or is it only that impact is only in terms of the carbon footprint, or is it in terms of other innovations in terms of energy efficiency products? Now we talk about energy efficiency. What does it, what energy efficiency mean? What do you objectively measure to say that you are an energy efficient organization? How do you compare year on year with the finance that you have taken from the market that this finance is being used for energy efficiency programs? No answers. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done by these standard setting agencies to consistently develop some of these terms: renewable energy, energy efficiency, greenhouse gas emissions, reduction, footprint. So all these words we talk about in a very kind of a 30,000 feet level definitions, but if you are tasked to really disclose these in a quantitative kind of an impact analysis that we have done, which is very important aspect for the purpose of giving disclosure to the market, there is no consistent standard. So standard setting bodies play a major role. And why the standard setting bodies today has in this media age, these standard setting bodies have got too much of color of the some kind of activist group or media groups or some interested groups can also color the standard setting organizations. Like you always see, like some of these diabetes related research, people generally question in terms of diabetes related research. It is a kind of a fad that is created by medical companies. That's what some people can claim to say. Unless because of this kind of a too much of imbibing and the market programming, that if you cross this, you are going to have this, if you cross this, you are going to have this, if you cross this. So a lot of these products that we are seeing in the market could have, I am not saying that they all have, could have some amount of a kind of a vested interest group research also getting into picture, making you to feel insecure about the way you are leading your life, and then induce you to certain amount of a lifestyle, thinking that you are leading up to a kind of a better lifestyle. So unless there are some kind of a social activist groups which can really question some of the standard setters, there is no balancing factor that can come. It is not necessary that all the setters are like this, but in future, if there is too much of focus that is coming on green, we should be worried about the kind of research that goes into leading to the conclusions that really were healed up. And if there is something really cannot be done about this, it is better not to invest in these kind of innovations and then focus on something else. The research is going to be a kind of a tool which is going to lead the direction to the policy. And if that research is not a kind of an impartial research and it is not an interested research, we are going to face the heat of it for the generations to come. And to some extent, the social activists might play a role in giving their expertise, engagement and evaluation parameters for the standard setting bodies. Not necessarily that even CSOs are completely unbiased. There could be, again, some people who want to provoke social activists to also get an undue advantage from the standard setting bodies. So there are a lot of things that we have to be really grappling when we start working in terms of the greening the financial system.
So this NDC is a kind of government policy or?
Yes. So this is what the commitments that the governments are given in the Paris Agreement, saying that this is my NDC plan. So each country will say that they left it to the countries actually, because they could not reach to some of this consensus, like between US and China. There are a lot of these debates going on, like whether this climate change itself is a problem or not. Like for example, recently US made its point felt to make sure that in G20 the word climate change is not there in the final communique. Because they say that climate change is a gone of the thing of the past, it is not a kind of a no longer a biggest risk that we have been made to believe. While in the previous generation that could be having the case, but now in the G20 communique, like G20 communique of September versus recently when it has happened in the recent summit, if you can see, there is a lot of difference in the communique. The word climate change has been different. So there are a lot of these kind of things which people are not able to arrive at the consensus, and there is a lot of hue and cry in terms of saying, you created the mess, you as a developed countries. Like for example, if you see the United States or maybe China, so the other countries are saying that if you created the mess, why should we follow the suit? It is not necessary that we all should be able to reduce the emissions because of the mess that you created in the industrial area. You benefited out of this for the time of development because of the industrial revolution. We never got the benefit of it, but now on the cost of it, we are required to bear the cost of it. So there are arguments in terms of what is going to be considered as a kind of an NDC. So the way why the Paris Agreement was to a certain extent successful was not that it is not giving a kind of an individual target. It said as a world we need to get this target out, and they said that each country can give its own commitment. So that at least we are seen into the community as not as a spoil sport, but as a kind of a person who is going to contribute to the larger public cause. So in the green financial system, the marketplace, the kind of products that we can have could be a kind of a, as we discussed, the green lending or the green credit and the green securities. Have you heard about Islamic products? Islamic banking. So Islamic banking is typically run on the Sharia principles. So Sharia principles prohibit taking interest on the money that is lent. So there are whole set of mutual funds, or whole set of bonds, or whole set of instruments that are created for Islamic community, because if they want to invest, they are not supposed to invest in some of these harmful kind of products, like tobacco for example is not a kind of a Sharia compliant product. So if you have a mutual fund, which is a Sharia compliant mutual fund, the mutual fund, it will buy shares only into those companies which does not say, for example, get into tobacco or alcohol, for example. In their portfolio, you don't find that kind of a company. So, in securities market, if you want to do some kind of an innovation, Islamic principles and green finance. Both can harmonize. Now ultimately, Islam also says that you need to have some amount of investment into the contributing to the society. Green finance is also talking about that. So when I just started getting deep, Islamic sukuks is one of those kind of a product which is basically an Islamic bond which is meant for protecting the river. So that then the market can get widely covered even to the Middle East range. So the money can flow into these kind of innovations. So the people, if they want to do some amount of innovations, I can cite an example of an Islamic sukuk where two kind of an objectives can get merged together, and ultimately that can create a kind of a deepening of the market. Green insurance. So green insurance is not a kind of a specific insurance per se, but encouraging people to pursue some amount of green initiative by virtue of which their insurance premium can be reduced. Like if you are going to take a house insurance, there could be a regular premium, green insurance premium. So as long as your house is, say for example, is in a kind of a natural way of doing this, then the house insurance is X. Instead of that, if your house is built upon a completely a green home, where it is like a kind of an environmental friendly home, by certain standards which the insurance company jointly with the house construction companies can decide, then for that green home branded houses, the insurance can be little lesser. So that kind of an innovation come in the space so that it will encourage the people to save on the green insurance. Or even in terms of the insurance for the directors and officers and liability insurance, where they have to face a lot of suits in terms of the environmental damages. That also is one of the green insurance products that they can sell. So a lot of market innovation is possible if people are really interested in terms of understanding what the risk we are trying to cover and what is the kind of opportunities we have got in terms of the products that we have already learned, but we can now dovetail as a kind of a re-engineering. So green bond, as I mentioned, is a kind of one of the tool. It's a securities market product. So most of you have just mentioned in terms of the way the bond is collected. So you go to the market, you tell to the public that this is the type of projects I am going to fund, and basis that prospectus, people want to invest in your green bond. And once you receive the money, you start investing this fund in the certain of those eligible projects. Now there are two international standards. One is the Climate Bond Initiative or the ICMA, International Capital Market Association Green Bond Principles, GBP. These are the two gold standards as of now. Both of them have got their own principles in terms of what are considered as green projects. Like mostly they talk about energy efficiency products or sustainable infrastructure. Or an infrastructure, say for example, road construction with a element of green, or say for example, entire street lights getting financed, or the entire street lights getting built up through solar energy panels, for example. So that is a kind of a sustainable infrastructure. What is sustainable actually?
Preserving something
Last one.
Preserving something meant for future.
Is meant for future. So the sustainable is not a kind of a cost sustainable. It's more in terms of, are we getting a development at the expense of our future generation? So that means it is not sustainable. That means we will be able to get a benefit out of it, but the future generation is not able to get a benefit out of it. So that is not a sustainable development, because anything which is sustainable is that the way we got a benefit in this generation, our children, grandchildren should be able to get the same kind of a thing. Then it is called as a sustainable development. Instead of this, if we develop, but at the expense of future generations getting spoiled, then that is not a kind of a sustainable thing. So whatever are the projects that are sustainable projects in terms of sustainable infrastructure, the kind of buses that we want to run, the kind of street lights that you want to create, the kind of vehicles you want to create into the public transportation system, or the kind of water vapor reduction kind of a heaters that you want to create. So all these projects that can come out of that, mainly as of now the renewable energy products are getting the momentum on the kind of a funding from the green bond projects. So you go to the market, lay down your priorities, identify some of the projects and say that we are going to finance to these projects. So IFC has started the green bond actually. World Bank has got a lot of green bond issuances. European Investment Bank has got a lot of green bond issuances. We at NDB has issued one green bond last year in RMB. So 3.7 billion RMB. So we went into the market and we identified some 7 projects actually. So the projects got sanctioned, the disbursement will start sometime mid this year. So if you go to the NDB website, you will find one country, each country. In India, we have going to finance Canada Line, so which is going to have some amount of financing for the on lending towards the solar or the renewable energy projects financed by Canada Bank actually. So in China we have one project, all these 5 BRICS nations we have got one project each, where you lay down what are all the projects. In fact, there the definition slightly different from the Chinese market versus the international market. I will come to this a bit later. But basically the green bond principle is basically that you classify the project, you have a defined use and management of the project, and at the end of every year or every quarter you are going to disclose information about how this project is being really funded, what kind of impact it is generated. So you have got participants like issuers, investors, which we all know, who issues and who invests. But the most important exciting area in this green bond market is the infrastructure providers. We don't have rating agencies. Now who will rate? In fact, there is an interesting topic that is going on. Apart from the credit rating only gives you a rating in terms of the credit worthiness of the issue. But in a green bond, do we really require only credit rating, or we also require a sustainable rating? So then, what kind of a models we need to work on? So in terms of the percentage of sustainable development portion into the overall credit portion, it is not necessarily a kind of a credit rating per se, but it is a bond rating. To what extent sustainable objectives can be modified and put it into the bond rating to a kind of a weightage in such a way that the bond rating signifies not necessarily the credit risk of the borrower, but also his contribution to the sustainable development objectives. So that if you have to differentiate between a green bond versus other green bond, or issued by one issuer versus the other issuer, you will have a benchmark as to whether this guy is better focused in terms of the green. Because in the market, unless somebody tells this information, the investors are not in a position to understand themselves. So the rating agencies are going to fill this gap by giving some amount of the rating to say that this is the bond rating, which includes both credit rating aspects as well as the sustainable development. The models are not yet developed. It's still a work in progress. And like a lot of underwriting, for example. So underwriters, what kind of a bond underwriting people have to do? The framework, as I told you, about disclosures. So who will lay down the disclosures in terms of what kind of an impact analysis that will come? So there is a lot of professional experts or engineers required at the time of doing impact analysis in terms of scientific studies that we need to carry out. So what kind of a panel that should be regulating them? Who provides these infrastructure disclosures? Not everybody can say that I have reduced these many tons of greenhouse gas emissions. So who certifies that? So those certification providers should be some people who should be experts in this kind of a field. So who gives some accreditation? So these are all the some public policy challenges that we are going to face in the times to come. So some of the projects, as we discussed about are renewable energy, energy efficiency and sustainable wastewater water management also. Even sustainable water management is also one of the clean water projects actually. That could be a kind of a green project that can be identified. I think if you can go to the first book, or the middle book, the Greening the China's Financial System, and you just Google it, you will find a PDF file. It's a very beautiful book you need to read. 2015, China identified green as one of its priorities. In fact, that is first time Chinese government realized the need for its financial system to be open up to the international public sector. Till recently, there was a lot of hue and cry about the Chinese financial system being little opaque to the international community. But if you see the green bond, in fact, if you see the green bond market, China market tops the world's green bond issuance market. If the world green bond issuances in the year 2016 are like 90 billion, out of which 36 billion have come from China. The issuances have happened in China. Pudong Development Authority is the highest, I think, is the green bond issuer in the last year. So what China has done is that they successfully negotiated with the international community and made themselves amenable to a kind of a public scrutiny in this area very strategically, so that when they want to position themselves as a kind of a world leader into this kind of an area, they have got a lot of space and actual work that they have done which people can follow. So you will find only the Chinese People's Bank of China has issued the green bond guidelines, very crisp guidelines which is modern on the green bond principles. So in December 2015 is when Chinese government has issued the guidelines, and our new development bank is the first multilateral development bank which issued the green bond in Chinese market. So other MDBs have started subsequently, but we are the first MDB. Other financial institutions are there, but a multilateral development bank raising money in China under the green bond brand. Ours is the first. So they have gone to the extent of designing a green project catalog. So they defined which are the projects are considered as green, which are not considered as green. They have gone into the 2-3 layers of classification so that it will be very handy for the investors also and to the issuers also. Of course, there is the red versus orange color breakdown, which is considered as what is considered as green in China may not be considered as green global. So out of 36 billion, if you consider, only 30 billion issuances are considered as green from an international standard point. But the standards got a little bit extended because some of the existing projects also they want to get the funding. So they have expanded or little diluted the kind of definition. So always whenever you find a green bond disclosures, you always find the China's total green bond market amenable to international definition, China's green bond market not amenable to international definition. They show both. But you will find even the amenable to international definition is always a significant chunk, which is 80% of the total issuances. Even if you consider the 30 billion which is issued in the China, that is meeting the international standards. And you find a lot of excitement in this policy space in China because the Green Finance Committee has been set up within the government under the aegis of the People's Bank of China and the government of China, and they all are working in terms of the standards and things like that. And contrary or slightly different from that is basically what is happening in the Indian market. We started with RBI guidance on priority sector lending. We made a small tweak there and said that even renewable energy is also considered as a kind of a priority sector lending. SEBI has given a board memorandum, not a kind of a final guideline. What SEBI's thought process, if you read through the Google and then find out, you will find SEBI's stance is that already we have got a guidance on the bonds. And the bond guidance typically says that the prospectus has to provide for the sources where you are going to use the funds. Already we have told you that already you can issue the bond. So green bond is nothing specific. But one type of the bond where the stated purpose is green. Now what is green? They gave 5-6 definitions and said that any other definition which the board may consider from time to time. That last line is somewhere people are still having not very kind of a comfortability or flexibility. So still people are trying to impress upon SEBI to say that we need to be little more clear if you have to really meet up to the international standards in terms of what is considered as green. So if some kind of a reference we can draw from the China Green Bond Project Catalog, which has literally gone down, or we can go into the Green Bond principles under the Climate Bond Initiative Green Bond categorization. So that taxonomy can be identified. And there is a new concept in India, which I have not seen exist in other countries, is basically the Green Bank. A green bank is typically a bank which can be created. It is not just bond is only one sort of finance. But if you can think of people depositing only for the purpose of green deposit or only for the purpose, objective is to say that I have like a payment bank. So the payment bank, it has been created only for the purpose of ensuring that your payment and settlement activities are carried out. So people come there only with the expectation not to earn interest. They wanted some amount of transacting capabilities out of this payment bank. Small finance bank. People make a deposit in the small finance bank knowing very well that the amount that they are going to put in the deposit is going to get funding only for the small finance and medium business enterprises. Like that, if you create a kind of a green bank, so Indian Renewable Energy Development Company, IREDO, which is what is the Indian agency, is in a position, they have issued a position paper to say that if we have to convert ourselves into a kind of a government-owned green bank, that is going to meet the requirements of India rather than a green bond model, because green bond model requires a lot of maturity in the market. So Indian markets have not reached to that kind of a maturity that they disclose the standards. So better way to do is to get into a green bank model rather than a bond model. That's what the thought process in Indian context. So basically, if the lessons that we have discussed are basically how much the state is going to intervene in all these matters, how much innovation, the way we have talked about the Islamic sukuk, how much innovation that the players can do, how much institutionalization in terms of all these standards that the policy setting bodies and the policy making bodies are going to give is going to determine the success of the green bond model. I think I'll open this to the floor for a few questions before I take the last question.
Yeah, good questions now. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Soumya Ray. I teach economics at JTPS. Just a little curiosity. At a point in your talk, you dwelt upon these players, the roles that these players can play. The state, the standard setting bodies, and the individual activists, the civil society. My curiosity is this: what role do you visualize for the community in this entire greening schema, so to speak? Because eventually, the receptacle for the greening initiatives is the community, the geographically delimited community or the culturally delimited community. And eventually, the outcome, the positive or otherwise outcomes of these greening initiatives has to depend upon compliance at the community level. So what role do you visualize for the community?
See, community, just to answer you, community is again getting stratified into one of these buckets. Either a community which is investing in the product, community which is getting impacted by the project, or a community which is going to, say for example, issue. So which is the community we are talking about? So depending upon this, again these three rules will come. So if we are going to talk about a impact community, so the community which is getting impacted, then the civil society organizations can be the voice of that community. So there should be some reason, some kind of a voice to that community. So individually people may not speak. The civil society organizations can represent the community that is getting impacted. If you are talking about the issuing community, then the regulators will become the community actually. So the regulators can be the voice of the issuing community, so to guide them in terms of what kind of a product they need to do. Similarly, the investor community, who is going to invest.
Yeah, now to continue in the same vein, for example, take a state like China, which is an authoritarian state. The community in such an authoritarian state is not significantly invested with political agency or social agency for that matter. But in India, the community is. And just as an aside, at a point in your talk, you also referred to the efforts of the Islamic community, for example, the Muslim community, and you said that some of these efforts are very compliant with the green initiatives. So do you think such a sensitivity to the cultural efforts of the community, be it a geographically delimited or a culturally delimited community, is inbuilt in this entire system, or does it have to be externally achieved?
See, that community international institute, like the slide, the third item that I have put here is the G20 task force on the climate related disclosures. So if somebody is going to endorse this, like including China for that matter, while we have that authoritarian notion, just because I have been there for some time, I don't really see it is a kind of a totally. It is true to a certain extent, but green finance, if you see, there is a lot of acceptance in terms of the external scrutiny. That is one positive point about the green finance that has occurred in China to a certain extent. So when you talk about community, the transparency with which you are going to give the information disclosure is the most important aspect in the green bond, because ultimately you are saying a promise, right? Green bond is nothing but a promise that I am going to use it for this purpose. So how we are meeting the promise is the only question that we need to focus upon. For that purpose, what are the kind of consistent standards? If people can evolve those consistent standards, for which the work is being happening in, at least in that country, or even India also, there are a lot of position papers getting done. So this market is still not evolved, but the direction in which it is going is that to counter that kind of a concern that we take the money, but we are not going to give the information. That is not going to be the case.
My name is Arnab Bose. Previously, I was with the Yes Bank for Responsible Banking, and before that, I was in the Energy and Resources Institute. I'm happy that you have quoted one of my works.
You see, very glad.
Author of one of those reports.
Fantastic.
Okay. Now, of course, I've heard the multilateral bank positions, and you're not deviating too far from it. It is an important thing. However, two things which possibly the MOFCC will be very worried about is essentially his point, adaptation. India's huge requirement is adaptation now. And may I point out right now, and possibly Bandhan Bank doesn't know it for itself, that it has actually solved various puzzles of the adaptation part itself. No matter what, we are going to see at least 2 degrees Celsius rise in global temperatures in the next foreseeable future. 1. 2 is, the world at the moment is already above 400 ppm. Okay. And most journals in scientific research say that 350 is possibly the tolerable level, which means we are looking at a 4-degree world. If it is a 4-degree world, climate finance is not going to happen.
Okay.
Okay. Which is where we need a transition to climate policy. And that has to happen right now. 1. 2 is, climate by itself is the 5th highest risk factor for global dynamics. 5th. There are 4 higher risk factors which are emanating right now. And given this, there is a extremely important, we talked about AI, etc., which is a risk factor in 3 years, whereas climate risk is a risk factor in for 50 years. So the point, of course, is that multinational banks, especially for developing economies, have to structure risk assessment tools, which is geared for a collective thing. Otherwise, climate by itself is not going to be proponent which was gonna. It's not a planetary risk anymore. Anyway, I can keep on talking because this is a subject which I've been looking
I'm
at.
personally very glad because these are at least, as I say, last 2 weeks learnings for me because I'm doing my own lecture in Bombay and a little bit interested in doing these kind of things. So that's the reason I stumbled upon. But one point just to add to what you said, let's say for example in India, this is my personal experience, demonetization. Now, if say for example, there are a lot of course that's another touchy subject which people have different extreme views. But if you have to take a balanced proposition in terms of how much demonetization has helped us in terms of understanding or getting acquainted with the digital economy.
Yeah.
So, with demonetization, how much is the people understanding about the digital economy? Without digitization, how much is the people's understanding about digital economy?
Right. And this end because I find the role of academic institutions extremely important in the auditing purposes.
Correct.
So when you are saying that I need to build capacity,
Correct.
where will you get that capacity?
Correct.
India, because of the UGC rules, has environment teachers across all schools and colleges.
Noted. I not.
And you have environment agencies.
Okay.
In fact, JGU itself is working on this to create, and I invite you, Department of Environment Studies, Delhi University and JGU are collaborating to figure out how to build that capacity which you just talked about.
Okay.
And how can you have rooftop solar without a community, which is his point as well,
Yeah.
playing an active role.
I understand.
So we have already built that capacity. Now a last mile effort is required. And railway stations, various things. For example, 2 days from now, CEW is hosting this solar for railways.
Okay.
Okay, so Suresh Prabhu is inaugurating that. So the point here is that there is a lot of capacity being built, but maybe sustainability actors are not
Coherent
converging.
enough to is, yeah.
But these are very important. So academic institutions are playing that role.
I agree.
And Professor Panda deliberately called me possibly for this conference.
I called everybody, all the faculty who are not attending this meeting.
Yeah. So
I hope you understand, being in administration, that's my job to see that all faculty is attending.
So that was very important because now we have that link. And
Yeah.
maybe you should be a part of that because you're talking about it.
I know. No, in fact, this you really opened up some amount of work I need to understand in terms of strategically, because I could really got up to the point of the focus on adaptation versus prevention.
Right.
So there is a subtle difference that I could understand while I was reading, but maybe from you I learned something in terms of how as a country we focused more in terms of our prioritizing adaptation more than, because even I am personally, I come from an experience where anti-money laundering. In anti-money laundering, we made terrorism as a kind of a biggest booth. We said that terrorism activity, like how much of people getting killed, giving value to life is one part, but how much is that kind of a terrorism as a risk factor? Now we made that as a biggest kind of a booth and started penalizing all the banks and then creating lot of softwares, lot of tools, lot of consultants, lot of transaction monitoring. We created a whole ecosystem on combating financing of terrorism. But what is the impact on the banks in terms of really, did they stop any kind of a terrorist activity? Did they stop any kind of a money laundering activity? We have been like 2002 onwards, we have got this anti-money laundering regulation. First case which got finally convicted is only this year, after 15 years. But the amount of investment that it has gone into the people's like banking system, because all the banking system cost is nothing but the cost borne by the society again. Now the point I am trying to make is that if, say for example, the policy decision is not very clear, the strategy is not very clear, because the international community is asking us to be signatory to the anti-money laundering convention, we started doing this. But here definitely we have a role to play, whether we want to be signatory or not, understanding what we want to do.
Right.
So there I think is basically India's stance is much more better compared to maybe in a kind of an AML kind or a CFT kind of a thing.
So take up questions from students.
Yeah.
Shall I green bench?
Just hold them with him. You came late, so you'll get a chance.
So myself, Vijay, I'm the first year MBA student over here. So we were talking about the green bonds, and when I had actually looked into the designs of green bonds, they actually have a very less like coupon rate compared to the other even government bonds which are out there in the market.
Issued by?
Issued by like check details like the rates usually come to.
No, who are the issuers?
It is because I don't think it is a function of green bond as a project. It is a function of your issuer.
So from the detail I got, it was written that SEBI is regulating all these issuance, and it does not happen in India properly, except for an S-Bank detail which I could come across. And looking onto all the details which are there, internationally we have a lot of banking associations, reporting associations. We need someone to set the standards, to set the reports and everything, which will take a long time. And we don't have an energy rating system over here. We have a credit rating. It will all take time. How will we actually make people go for these green issuance or green bonds? Because I've been seeing in news that it has been like a huge market.
No, in fact, it is not a very, very old kind of a concept that we are catching behind. If I have to take Mr. Arnab's, right? Yeah. So if I have to take Mr. Arnab's point, in fact, there is a kind of a thought process behind while we are not catching up also. It is not that it is a kind of a neglected topic, but the ideology with which we approach the subject could be different. So there are two pathways that people are doing, one focusing on mitigation and one focusing on adaptation. So therefore, there could be a kind of a thing we need to wait and watch for. In fact, that is one point of answer. Second is in terms of the rate or the coupon being low is not always a function of green or otherwise. It is a function of the issuer. If a World Bank issues a green bond versus an S-Bank issues a green bond, definitely the coupon rates will be different. Like an NDB issuing it. For example, we may not be the kind of a best rated guys, we are the new kid in the block. So the rating, you can find our green bond rate might be slightly higher compared to maybe a green bond rating that you get for A, or a coupon rate you may get for a IFC or any EAB which has got. So it's always a function of the rating of the issuer. Not green has no role in terms of the pricing at the current moment.
So after the Superman question, we'll go to your question.
So like the green banks are new and the green banks are three, how will it deal with the problems of review and credit risk and in case of the startup phase, because in times of recession, how would they go?
Because it's like your energy Fitbits. You saw the Fitbits, right? Which the people wearing these things. They are not a kind of alternative to your morning walks. Like, say for example, wearing a Fitbit does not guarantee you health. Wearing a Fitbit will give you a discipline. Right? So similarly, walking on any kind of a thing is not a kind of, walking actually is not a kind of, in my opinion, you can see my body and make out I don't normally walk, but theoretically, walking is not a kind of an exercise. Just because we don't spend up the rest part of the day in walking, we created this as a discipline. If, say for example, our parents and all have never gone into that kind of a morning walk and all, but still they are more healthy than us, is because in their daily lives they have taken so many steps on a day-to-day basis that they don't need to consider walking as a separate task in itself. Green, if you ask me, that assessment if you ask, is our regular task. In our erstwhile days, when you are doing a kind of a capital or a project assessment, green is a part of, environmental risk is always a part of our credit assessment. Like when you assess a project of an infrastructure, first thing you will see is the social and the environmental framework. But that is not leading you the kind of a desired result that the world is expecting us to do. Now we are pulling it out and calling it as a green bond, which is like calling it as a morning walk. It doesn't mean that the regular exercise is not supposed to be there. It is only giving a little more focus to that which is supposed to have been, but has been neglected. So credit risk is always the core risk of a bank. When I lend money for a project, there are a lot of risks. There could be a terrorist risk, or there could be a credit risk, there could be a character risk, or there is a capacity risk, or the collateral risk. There are risks that are there, of which environmental risk is also one of the risks. By saying green bond, it is not meaning that I will neglect all other risks and only focus on green risk. It is that I give green risk also equal importance to the other risks of the credit assessment. It's like morning walk. Just because morning walk, it doesn't mean that I don't do rest of the things of the day. You have to do the rest of the things of the day. But because I know that in my regular day-to-day, I am missing this element, little focus, because I am running for my livelihood, because I am sitting too much in the computer, I am working so much things, I am taking too much of stress, my less sleep is coming into, is getting impacted. Because of these reasons, the amount of the attention that I need to give to the walk or motion I am not giving, that's the reason I will take out some time and put it as a kind of a schedule separately. This is exactly what is happening with green bond.
Sunny, we have a question this side.
Good evening, sir. My name is Nikhilesh from MBA second year. The thing is, sir, as you are telling that it should be a discipline. It should not be. It should be made a compulsory thing.
Correct.
Don't you think this activity, a global green bond, is being very much going in a path of CSR activity which has been done by the companies? It's like a compulsion being done, even if they are going to a right path, they are attaining a good profit from the existing work they are doing. But developing this concept of green bond, it's like forcing them from
I come from ICSE. In ICSE, we have a totally beautiful concept called as co-holding of views, which means that everything you have to see not as this or that. There is always a positive, there is always a negative. So unless you can't co-hold that views, that means if you say that green bond is good, if you want me to argue, I'll say green bond is good. If you want me to argue green bond is bad, I'll argue green bond is bad. Because the subject or any topic is such that it will have pro, it will have con. Just because it is pro, you should not do much emphasis on this. Just because it has negative, you should not shun it. A policy maker should always be able to do, that is where the people's resentment towards polarization is happening these days. Polarization takes away the ability to co-hold the views. Co-holding, if you have in mind, it is not that if you don't think of any of these things. For example, if the United Nations framework, a word exists that there is no United Nations framework of convention on climate change at all. Imagine a world, why would we see like this? Why would I get excited about this? Why would you get excited about this? Why would this lecture happen? Why would I understand from him that this is a kind of a strategy? Because somebody has initiated, some thought process has gone, some amount of research has happened, so people are talking about it. But only thing is that we should not be blindfolded that somebody else is talking, therefore we should be able to follow the suit, which is what an experience, I think, at least thanks to Arnav's point again, I could learn that this is the way in which the people are going to differentiate or debate. So always in academic discourse, debate is an important aspect. Debate is important because you need to have co-holding of the views and which view in a proportion it will go. It is not always at extreme right or extreme left. The other day I was telling even the best of the classification of a man and a woman is not binary. A male is a classification, if you call, is nothing but it is mostly male. There is no classification if you see in a scientific term, it is called as a masculine leadership or a feminine leadership or a male or a female. If a person is called as a male, that means that he exhibits 99% tendencies of qualified as male. So there is no binary answers there. So if the nature's basic distinction of male and female itself is not binary, now forget about any other distinction which we are going to create is not going to be binary at all. Always co-holding exists.
One question here.
Good evening, sir. I'm Vanshu Biara from the first year. Sir, you mentioned Paris Agreement statement. We are to take care of the global temperature increase. It should not increase by 2 degrees Celsius or the better side 1.5 degrees Celsius in comparison to the pre-industrial era. So, what is the pre-industrial era?
Is it 1880 prior? That's what I got to hear. So 1880, about 1880 when the industrial revolution really kicked off, which has created the necessity of the need for burning the fossil fuels for any kind of a locomotion.
And how much have we progressed since then?
I think they say it is around 1.3 degrees centigrade is where we stand right now compared to the world average at that time.
Jeffrey Sachs classification says 1852.
Yes, sir.
That's the classification. Yes, we have one question.
So my name is Gautam, I am from MBA first year. My question is that, sir, like carbon credits are bought by developed countries and these are being bought by developed countries from underdeveloped countries. So is there a provision of such trade-off of NDCs between different countries?
I don't think that this is the reason. It is not a kind of a tradable commitment, it is a voluntary commitment. So there is no objectives which are defined for commitments. It is my understanding.
Okay. Do you have some questions? I see some refreshes.
Sir, I have one question. Sir, you
First introduce yourself.
Sir, my name is Shanawaz, sir, and I am from BBA first year. Sir, I wanted to, I had a question about, sir, you talked about Islamic sukuks and sir, about their relation as the innovation plays, sir, in the green bond and all that. Sir, can you please throw some more light? Sir,
No, basically it is not that innovation. Whenever we talk about a financial innovation, it is basically nothing where something new will happen. But you will find some market where it is already some need that is felt, and you find some other place where that need is getting fulfilled. So here, say for example, the need is that we need to get finance for the environmental purpose. That is the need that needs to be fulfilled. Here there is a community which is ready to invest their money in a activity where that money can be utilized for larger cause of the society. So that is Islamic finance. So innovation is nothing but where there is a need fulfilling requirement getting met by the need, what you call the person who is going to fulfill the need. So Islamic Sukuk will actually marry both. We have got an Islamic finance need here, you have got a green bond finance requirement. So if somebody can think of this community's resources to be tapped up for this purpose, that's when the product innovation has happened, which is called as the Islamic Sukuk. So that community's need is also fulfilled, and this larger cause of like protecting the environment is also getting fulfilled.
Thank you, Sunny.
One last thing I just wanted to show is that omnitrium perfect. Everything that comes in trees is perfect. That is what I generally believe. It is like roti kapda makan. You generally say anything you say is always saying 3 words actually. So I just wanted to summarize some of these things. We spoke about the taxonomy, climate change, global warming, and greenhouse effect. We spoke about international initiatives, United Nations Framework on Convention of Climate Change, Kyoto Protocol, and COP21 of Paris. We spoke about green finance as a part of financing, fundraising, and facilitating. We spoke about 3 important players, states, standard setting bodies, and societal activists. We spoke about the financial market architecture having banking products, finance products, or securities products, and insurance products. We spoke about green bonds, which has got its own principles and own participants and identified projects. And we spoke about Chinese experience in terms of how they started with green lending, green bonds, and green projects. India, how it started priority sector lending to incurring, green bonds, and a proposal for green bank. And we finally ended our lessons in terms of how the intervention by the state and innovation by the parties and institutionalization by the policy makers. This is, I think, is the summed up version in terms of the thought I wanted to do.
Thank you.
Yeah.